NHL Draft Combine just wrapped up out in Buffalo. Have you taken some time to kind of decompress from all that and maybe recover from some of the testing you guys had to do out there?
Yeah, Saturday we finished up the testing, and then I went back to Peterborough for Saturday and Sunday. Kind of relaxed there with my parents and my family, who I haven't seen in a bit. And then I was back up in Toronto Monday to start training and kind of get my summer program started up.
So what does that consist of? What's your summer program like? What's a day for Porter Martone?
Yeah, so usually working at around 9:15. I've been training at the gym. It's going to be my third summer now. It's kind of through like my agency, and it's a great gym up here, Junction Performance. So I'll get a workout in there, and then usually right now probably only 2 times a week I'll be skating. Just kind of with a group through the gym. It kind of consists of skill skating, power skating, some small area games, and then I like to golf. Hang out with some buddies that I have up here. So I'll probably like to hit the links probably once a week. But yeah,
Once a week. That's pretty nice.
yeah. Whenever I have some spare time, trying to find a tee off time.
Yeah, no, that's good. I wish I could do that as well. You had a pretty big season this year for your draft year for Brampton. Like, how would you kind of characterize how the year went for yourself and setting yourself up for now looking like a guy that could go in the top 5 of the draft?
Yeah, it's been a pretty exciting year. You looked up for this draft season since you're a little kid, and just being able to, be in such a great organization with the Steelheads was amazing. Come this year, I get given a leadership role, was named captain. So I just wanted to come this year, and, we had a very strong team, and I just wanted to go and help and give my team a chance to win every single night. And that's what I try to do. I think I developed a lot as a player, just not on the offensive side, but as my whole game. And I really found that I developed kind of all areas of the ice when I did go over the World Championship with the men and played with them. It's a big difference, but it was pretty cool to spend some time with them at the end of the season. But yeah, overall it was fun. I got to represent Canada at the World Juniors at the World Championships, and then had a really good season with the Steelheads too. So it was a blast, definitely, in your draft season.
The biggest challenge from going from junior to pro is the speed of the game. Right. Was that the biggest change you saw when you were playing against the pro players and playing with the pro players?
Yeah, definitely when you go up with a higher level, their plays are going to be made faster, and, it's going to be different. But, I felt like I adjusted just fine, being able to play 2 pre-tournament games with celebrating, connecting on a line. I felt like we really, found some chemistry there, and, we're being made plays and created offense. And then when I got into the tournament, it was good too. You're playing against, Sweden, Denmark, some high NHL players on both teams. And it was fun, got to go out there and line up with, Sidney Crosby, Nathan McKinnon, all of them. But yeah, like you said, it does get faster. But, that's when I realized, these are NHL players, but you can't play with them. I felt like I kept up with the pace fine. Definitely, I have lots of room to grow. And, I think it's just going to keep on getting better.
I saw you told a story about Marc-Andre Fleury pranking some people. Can you tell that story to our audience?
Yeah, so I think maybe Fantilli might have said something to him just about, I think Fantilli wanted to stick, and Fleury's like, okay, I'll maybe do a prank on you every day or maybe every other day. And one prank was pretty funny. It was after a game, and Fleury wasn't playing that game, so he had some spare time on his hands before the game. But I think he sewed the bottom of Fantilli's pants, the cuffs shut. So when Fantilli tried to go, put on his pants after the game, he couldn't get his feet through. So I know it gave a good giggle and a laugh to everyone, over there. But it was pretty cool, how Fleury handled himself. He's been in the league for so long, and he's such a historic goalie and a role model for a lot of younger players. But you see how much fun he has with it, and he always has a smile on his face, and he's great to everyone, whether it's a younger player or older player. He's just an awesome human being.
Well, not only the work on the ice with Team Canada at the World Juniors, but what was it like just kind of being around and spending some time with guys like Marc-Andre Fleury and Sidney Crosby, and kind of what did you take away from that experience and being around those living legends of the game, really?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Just before I went, these guys are all my role models, and there's someone, people who I look up to, and I got to go over there and you got to play with Sidney Crosby, Nathan McKinnon, Ryan O'Reilly, and Marc-Andre Fleury. So they are my role models still, but, now I can consider them friends. And, I got friendships with them. I still stay in touch with a couple of the guys, to this day. So, it's pretty cool, just going out with team dinners. I got to learn a lot, about the NHL lifestyle. And, I got to see them really, really put in the work firsthand. So, it was an amazing month. We definitely fell short. We didn't win a gold medal, but, I couldn't put a price tag on that opportunity. It was pretty special, to go, play with the NHL players, be around them, and, learn a lot of things from, some of the best NHL players of all time, and, Sidney Crosby. So I definitely think, I got a big advantage going over there for a month, and, just going to prepare me when, I do go into NHL training camp and, try to make an NHL team.
We had a question from our audience. I know you may have been asked this before, but who are some guys that you think you compare to in the NHL?
Yeah, I mean, I do try to play my own game, but a couple players, Corey Perry, definitely in his prime. You've seen it. He's so good, and even to this day, he's 40 years old in the Stanley Cup Finals, and he's still contributing to Edmonton. He's played on the first line with McDavid, and they definitely found some chemistry there. So, he's doing something right for sure. And then, I like the Matthew Tkachuk and the Tkachuk brothers too. Kind of just the edge they play with. They're both really good hockey players as well. High hockey IQ. He makes plays. He can score goals. At the net front. That's kind of where I feel like I exceed to around there. But they know when it's the right place to maybe send a message or play hard as well.
Well, we are a Blackhawks podcast, so we've been kind of looking at where they're at number 3 and players that could fit in their system and their style. And one thing that comes up with Kyle Davidson the last couple of drafts is speed and skating. And, one thing that I think people, when they, critique your game is that, the skating is not as high level as other attributes of your game. What do you take away from hearing that? How do you work on that? And I guess how do you see yourself fitting with the Blackhawks should they take you at number 3?
Yeah, I mean, so that people do critique that about my game. It's something that I am working on too. I want to become more explosiveness, but I think I get to the right areas on the ice, just as fast. Hockey isn't a speed skating game, and I think I get to the right areas and I do that. I feel like once I get going, I'm a pretty good skater. Maybe I'm working on the explosiveness, but I also just proved it over the World Championships. I was able to keep up and play with NHL players, so. I'm definitely not saying, it is the best aspect of my game, but, I am working on it. And, I felt like when I did go over and play with the NHL players, I play with a lot of fast players, I was able to keep up and make plays. And, something I could, I think I could, bring to the Blackhawks organization, just that, big power forward presence. And, I think I have a tremendous hockey IQ that I could see the ice and, set up players. And, that's something that I really take pride in is, being a really high hockey IQ player, that playmaking ability. But, I am continuing to work on my skating, and it's something that, I want to improve my game along with everything else. I'm not at the best, and, I'm going to keep on working every day. And, I'm never going to stop because you can never be at your best.
When you hear, I know this is a time of year where prospects are picked apart. Every part of your game is out there in print, on the internet. Everyone says, oh, he's too slow, he's too small, whatever it might be about whatever player. How does that, like, when you read that stuff, how does that make you feel? Like, does it piss you off when you're like, wait a minute, I'm not that slow. I scored 37 goals in 57 games. I'm not slugging down the ice. Like, does that motivate you? Does it piss you off? How do you feel when you hear that about your game?
Well, I mean, people on the outside can, always, criticize your game and say things about you. But you know what? I don't even listen to that. I know my ability. I know the way I play. I've proven it that I could keep up at every level I played at and at the bigger ones with the NHL players as well. So, people are going to criticize you throughout your whole career. And it's kind of it's something that, hockey players, they have that gift. You just got to stay to a positive mindset. You can do it. You can play with it. So that's something, I learned also with the NHL players. The people might criticize that, but, that you could produce at that next level. You can produce in the NHL. So it's something that, people are going to say that, definitely I know that I have to get better at that. So, I'm not going to let other people tell me that. I know who I am, and I know the person I am, and I know what I need to do to get better.
How has the process of now that your season is over, you're leading up to the draft, and throughout the year you're talking with teams at the draft, or at the combine, you're getting not wined and dined, but soda popped and dined.
And chicken nuggets.
Yeah. But how has that process been? Like, how have those conversations been with other teams? Like, I'm always fascinated by that, because as you guys as prospects go through this process, there's so much, like, we're talking about, like, kind of like nitpicking of your games and stuff. And what is that process like? Do you, like you said, like, do you kind of like just try and block things out and focus on yourself, or is there a lot of conversations, interviews, questions that really like kind of like break down the like person you are and player you are?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun time of year right now. It's coming back from the combine, getting ready for the draft. It's pretty cool being able to go meet all the organizations at the combine, have interviews with teams. And, it just kind of, I feel like they want to get to know you as a person, and just like maybe your background, where your family's from, what we were like growing up. And, you get to learn a bit about their organization too. And, kind of the culture they have there and the identity and, kind of the stuff behind the scenes that you might not just see on the ice. So, yeah, there's some tough questions in the combine, but I think it's just teams trying to get to know you, and they know the player you are. They're trying to get to know more of the person of you, and it's fun right now. I'm just going to every day. I'm just going to try to get better. I go to the gym, on the ice, and the draft will come, and the draft, it's going to be a fun experience in LA with your family, but the draft just kind of starts your hockey career there. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what number you get picked. It's what you do with that. And I think the real work starts after that.
We saw after the combine, and last question here, we'll let you go. We appreciate your time, Porter. You had some good things to say about the Hawks organization. What appeals to you about potentially being a Blackhawk?
Yeah, I mean, it's something special they have going on in the Blackhawks organization right now. Kind of the prospect pool they've built up. You got Connor Bedard. You got Frank Nazar. You got a bunch of players that they can see them building around. And it'd be an honor to be selected by such a great organization and a great group of people and management staff. And it's something special you can see there. You have a core group. You're going to continue to keep adding pieces, and you could really see them winning the Stanley Cup and in the times to come. And that's the goal of my hockey career. That's the biggest thing. I feel like I want to be a contributor to win Stanley Cups, and that's a big thing for me, is lifting that Stanley Cup over my head. And you could see the Blackhawks, you could see the direction they're going, you could see the young players they have, and it's something that you created there with their culture and their identity, and it's something that every kid wants to do, but it's only certain people know how to dig deep and win the Stanley Cup. So I see it. I watch a lot of Blackhawks games. You see Connor Bedard coming up through the system, and they got something special with all the prospects there. And yeah.
All right, we got one more because someone paid to ask you this. DJ wants to know: have you ever been to Chicago? If so, what's your favorite part?
Yeah, I have. I think I don't know how old I was, but I was in a spring hockey tournament there, and I played games with the practice rink, got to kind of tour the practice facility, and I got to go see the game rink too. But, it's a beautiful city. The fans are very passionate. I've seen a lot of games on TV this year. It's pretty special. And, I remember going there. I went to the, Blackhawks shop, and I remember I got a Blackhawks hat that I wore for, 3 years until it got too sweaty. But, I still got the bag that the hat was in, at my house. So it's a great organization, and it's a great spot to, play hockey.